Welcome to Going Deeper into Dev Marketing by Developer Market Pair, a show where we go beyond surface level, advise, and focus on actionable insights that dev tool founders and marketers can use to grow today. We'll do long interviews with top dev tool marketers, solo deep dives with yours truly, sprinkled with real life examples and teardowns. This will be fun. Oh, and yes, this was AI generated, but the rest of the show is very personal. Now, on to the show.
So Demetrios, it's awesome to talk to you about this, about communities. We're going to talk about communities. You have built, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best community of craft that I have ever seen working in DevTools and in tech. So I'm talking about, for those fools who haven't heard about the community, MLOps Community, if you're in that space, then definitely check it out. But I think it's fantastic. I had a pleasure of seeing it grow, at least from a certain moment, but it grew to something so big right now, right? It's huge. So you have like 20. I checked today. It's like 22,000 people in the Slack, and then what else is there? I know there are conferences, meetups, stuff like that. What else is there?
Yeah, there's a ton, man, and obviously it was no thanks to your help that it grew so much. You and Neptune supporting it were instrumental in one of the ways that we got out and started having more local community meetups were just the in-person meetups. We have in-person conferences, virtual conferences. We've got a newsletter, we've got podcasts, we've got a blog, and we also will do the occasional survey plus report. And I think that is about it for now.
That's all there is.
There's probably something else that I am forgetting about right now, but
I mean, I think that hub is also pretty cool. That hub with all the content. I'm sure that drives a lot of traffic and signups and builds that loop.
Yeah. And we like to say, so like, yeah, there's 22,000 people in Slack. There are, I think, probably around 78,000 people that have come through the community in one way, shape, or form, whether that's they've joined a local meetup or they have come to a virtual conference or they're on our newsletter distribution list. And there's probably a lot more that are just listening to podcasts and they never actually join Slack or join the newsletter or whatever.
Yeah. No, and so how long did it take to build this whole infrastructure of super technical content? And again, like to folks who don't know, like this is a really technical, really practitioner driven content and community conversations, at least from my perspective looking at it. How long did it take to build this?
Yeah, it took around 4 years. So we started in 2020, and you make a good point that it's very technical by nature. It is also like non-bias. So it's a practitioners community. It's not owned by an open source project or any company. And so there's differences, which I'm sure we'll get into. Like if it's your own community and you're an open source project / VC backed company, and how you interact with that type of a developer community versus a non-biased, almost like third-party community where people are asking about any type of tool or they have any question that is around a certain space.
Yeah, on that front, I have a question. The way I look at it, you have this communities of craft, as I mentioned before, and then you have communities of support, like a lot of either open source or VC-backed products. They would have that Slack or Discord that is basically a community of support. You come in, folks who develop on that particular product, they come in and ask for help. They get the help, right? And I know there are communities where you have community of craft that is connected to the vendor, but not many. And I'm wondering, like it seems hard. Why do you think it's hard? I look at numbers and it's not happening often, but I'm wondering why this is not happening more often. Is it sort of like almost a must for this to be external?
No, so I've seen companies that have done this. And if you think about like, maybe not the best example, but there was a great community around HashiCorp and all the stuff that happened that was a very vibrant community, and I don't see it as only a support community. Or Docker has an incredible community, and especially when it was in like 2015, that was very vibrant. It still is very vibrant, but if you think about when Docker was first coming out. And another one that I like to point to is like GitLab. That is a
Hmm.
very vibrant community, and it has its own quirks, and it's uh,
Yeah,
it's
true.
got
But like
ways.
a lot of this could be sort of that those companies, they may have, I think if you build something as big as GitLab or as big as GitHub or as big as HashiCorp, the community of users of that particular product is so big that the pockets can emerge.
Mhm.
I'd argue that this could be the case where pockets emerge of folks who are just interested in, I don't know, building on terraforms. I think, right? That's the thing behind, connected to
Exactly.
HashiCorp or stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like you, or folks who are just DevOps, oriented, I guess,
Yeah.
that built
But
there.
if you think about it, I think that it was very clear from the strategy of these companies that community was going to be a vital part of their go to market. And so going back to the question of like, why isn't this more common? I would say, and I would argue that it takes a certain breed to fully commit to community because it's so fuzzy on the metrics. It is so unclear on the attribution of revenue. And it's also such a long game. You can't create a community, especially a developer community, and expect to be able to just sell into that community. The
Yeah.
developers are going to sniff that out right away, and then you're not going to have any goodwill, and you're not going to have anything that makes a developer want to invest time and resources into sustaining that community.
So you said certain breed, and I want to talk to it because typically, it takes certain breed of people that converts to a culture or sort of certain values that you want to have, both from folks running the community, the admins that join, or the devros you hire, or then the folks you let into that community, right? So I'm wondering, what are some of the values that you have for MLOps community? How do you think about it? Are there sort of like core principles of, if I see this, then that person, I don't want to work with that person. That person could help me build it. Or if this is a certain behavior that I see, we have to do something about it because this is something that is going to kill the community. I wonder if there are certain, sort of like values or core principles that you like to have to
Yeah,
when you
I
think about this
always
stuff.
like to look at it as you got to have fun first and foremost. And I'm a little bit quirky and weird. And so I try to bring that energy into the community so it's not only dry and technical all day. How can we make it a little more fun and a little more entertaining? I was talking to you before we hit record about edutainment, and it feels like that is something I tend to lean on. What I hope is that because I'm doing that and so many others in the community have been doing that, it gives anyone permission. It almost creates that culture to let others know that there's not really that much judgment going on around here.
Play the
And
guitar, the famous
yeah,
song.
you can do whatever you want. You can be weird and it's all good. Actually, it's even better if you show us who you really are beyond the 9 to 5. We're all here because ultimately our day jobs are in need of like us to be in a way, or it's for our careers. We're here for our careers, but we don't need to default to like being very professional just
Mm,
because it is career oriented.
mm. So it almost I mean, it feels like it almost creates that the tribe, sort of the place where you go like that, especially, we're talking 2020, like going into, that, I don't know, the coffee table conversation, whatever, like just a water cooler
Yeah.
conversation, just have someone who gets you, there,
Mhm.
and because everything just changed, right? So I think maybe that
Yeah.
that also is a part of it.
Well, and so there's that piece, which is like be weird. And I used to
Hmm.
always be inspired by the bumper stickers that I would see when I was growing up, and it would be like keep Portland weird or keep Austin weird. And I always thought that was so funny because it was almost taking back the idea of weird being a bad thing and saying, no, we
We want
fly
it.
that freak flag and we are claiming it.
Mm.
And so there's that piece. But then on the other side, if it's just a weird community that you're looking to be a part of, you can go to a lot of different subreddits and get that, or many different Discord servers. What I also try, and the other value is, can we have very deeply technical and educating content? And back to the point of why a lot of companies struggle with community, I think people don't realize how much content you really need to be pumping out in so many different mediums because everyone's different. Some people read, some people like to listen, some people like to just read short form, some people really want deep dives, they want how to's. And so you want to meet people where they are. Some people like videos and they want to watch. And so the community
And I
almost
think I think
needs
it's not it's
to
not it's not
adapt.
you mentioned the formats, and I fully agree, right? The formats, people consume it differently, right? 100%. It's also interesting when you see folks who do, like some like super short podcasts, get
Yeah.
to the point, have everything pre-prepared, and the other ones are, well, let me listen to the rambling because there's
Uh-huh.
cool stuff in the rambling. But anyway, um, I think that's not the only part of formats, right? The part that, to me at least, sets this particular community apart is how much sort of long tail, super practitioner, super from firsthand experience content people have created and shared in the community, whether that be discussions or discussions with you, discussions in that Slack, or I presume other stuff as well, like the talks and stuff. Like when you think about it, there's just so many different stacks you can talk about, so many different sub tools, sub problems within, ML ops, and to get someone who has done it to talk about it, this is gold. But how do you get someone who has done it to talk about it? That's the tricky
Yeah.
part, I think, right?
First of all, how do you even find them and make sure that they're
Hmm.
in the conversation and they're checking whatever the Slack or they're willing to come on to a podcast
So
or
how do you find them? Because it seems that, like I remember in that Slack, there would be, a conversation, and you would jump in there and say, hey, this guy knows about it, or something like
yeah.
that. Like that would be common. And I wonder, like, how do you have like a spreadsheet for that? Or like, you keep
Wish,
folks like,
man.
I don't know.
I think there are tools now that can help with that, like Orbit or Common Room or some of that. I never used any of those, and I didn't have a spreadsheet either. We have in the MLOps community a rich corpus of data on the different people and what they talk about and what their LinkedIn profile says and what their community or what their job title is. We don't necessarily use that. It's just because we're data nerds and we wanted to do stuff with it. Like we have hackathons and we can use that data. And but at the end of the day, when I do that, it's because I almost have a Rolodex in my head and I remember conversations with people, and it's usually someone that I've had a conversation with or I've seen talk about something. And so I'll bring it up and I'll mention, oh, yeah, I was talking to so and so about this. And that helps a ton because it brings those experts into the room and it helps people recognize that they're just like you and me. For example, I think one of the most recent times that I did this I generally will do it like once or twice a day in Slack, and then via email if somebody needs connecting. I feel like I was Cupid in a past life because I really enjoy connecting people. That's one of my favorite things to do. And especially if I get to hear about adventures that these people that I connected go on together. So whether that's,
Mm.
oh, this person got a job because I made a connection, or, oh, now these two people are founding a company because I made the connection there. That's always awesome to me. And that's very rewarding. But I remember somebody was asking about DevOps monitoring practices for ML and different SRE techniques. And this was in the MLOps community Slack. And we just so happened to have Niall Murphy, who basically invented the term SRE at Google in 2010 or 2012. I can't remember what year it was. And then he wrote the SRE handbook, which is like the seminal book on that. It's the Bible for SREs.
Hmm.
And he's in Slack and he's pretty active in Slack. And so I just said, oh, you know who would know a lot about this? The guy that wrote this book, and dropped the link to the book and said, it's Niall Murphy. And then Niall chimes in and says, oh yeah, and there's also these books that you might like too, and this and that, but feel free to ask any questions. So yeah, it's really about trying to connect people. And also the other principle that I think is important is trying to give the community members themselves a platform. And
Mm.
hopefully, if I'm doing my job correctly, I'm building everyone up and making sure that if there's good quality work being done, it surfaces to the top and people in the community
Can you maybe give
recognize
give
it.
an example of that? I'm trying to, sort of like just to making it more concrete. What do you mean by building a platform for folks to grow on
So
here?
let's imagine someone writes an amazing blog post, and I find there's many ways to try and like build someone up and recognize them for their work. They put in a lot of hard work probably to write that blog post. And especially if it's one of those technical pieces of content that's like no bullshit, then you really have to appreciate that in these days 10 times more, because most stuff can be written with ChatGPT and it can just be marketing jumble and gibberish. And so if somebody writes an incredible piece of content, there's plenty of ways to make sure that at least in the MLOps community, and especially if they're an MLOps community member, they get recognized for that, or they get at least a shout out. And so you can mention it in Slack. You can start a discussion around it, right, in Slack, or ask specific questions around it. We can have them on the podcast. We can put it in the newsletter. We have many different ways. We can ask them to give a talk at a local meetup. It's just all these ways that you can engage with the community. The community by itself, it's not like I am the community, right? Or you are the community. The community wouldn't exist if there weren't all of us in there. So
That's true, but I think what you're saying is actually even more important, more profound. And now that we're building our community, the developer marketing community, I see that is basically it's this work behind the scenes of the, like the something you mentioned, like we can get them on the podcast or we can start a discussion. Yes, but you have to start a discussion because that person, they may not want to break the community by, I don't know, promoting their post, even though the
yeah,
post is fantastic, they don't want to do it. But if you share it, right, or if you invite them to do something, I mean, we only have the Slack, but like if in New York is like if you invite someone to do a podcast because you read that blog and it was fantastic, you're pushing that conversation, you're giving
yeah,
them that spot to be recognized for fantastic work they did, but it is you. And I think it's crucial because like you can have a big community, lots of folks writing, and nobody wants to share that stuff. I wouldn't, like the folks who want to share, typically it may be different incentives than folks who just wrote it for themselves or something, like they wrote it just to I don't know, share their experience. They may not be not as happy to share it in that community because they don't want to break it. They want to come out
100%.
promotional, especially in in dev, in dev community. So I think
Yeah.
that work of, it's on you as a,
But
admin, or isn't it?
hopefully I'm not the only one that is doing this, right? And I am, again,
Now
creating
you're,
more
you're
of a
not the only
culture.
one now, right?
Yeah.
You're not the only one now, but I think that's the now it obviously is huge. It's very vibrant, like, because one thing is to have a big community that is dead, and that's how many communities
Mm.
end up, big dead,
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
dead slacks.
That is true. That is like postmortems on those. I would really like to know why that happens. I have my theories, but it's funny that you mentioned that because I've seen my fair share of big and dead.
I read an article about it, like somebody actually going into this. I can find, or maybe it was a Hacker News thread, but basically the claim there was that um, over time, like, so it starts typically with folks who are senior, very in the weeds. They want to find a platform to talk with one another, not about the beginner subjects, but,
Mm-hmm.
and then over time, this attracts folks who are beginner,
Mm-hmm.
and that in time attracts folks who are vendors.
Mm.
And over time, there is less and less of those discussions between the folks who are in the weeds,
Yeah.
and more discussions who are, either promotional or beginner like. And it's hard to, if you don't gate it. And many communities, as they are measured by the size, or they think this is a good way to measure it, then they let everyone in. And when you let everyone in, and you have, out of 15 new threads in the general, 10 are about how do you get into MLOps,
Yeah.
right? Then the seniors stop coming as long, they stop coming as often. They don't answer those questions. Then folks stop coming in because they see there's, like, it's juniors answering juniors, or vendors answering vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's that, so give it
Great.
enough time and it will happen, because obviously the distribution of beginner versus, advanced or like senior is obviously heavily skewed toward beginners, right? And so those folks, they will find another community, or create a pocket of it, or create a Discord that is small, I don't know, or do something like that. I mean, that was the claim there, and I think it's like it does make sense, like we actually in ours, we make sure not to let everyone in. Like I wonder if, because I don't remember, you do that too, right? Or no? Like
Yeah.
the
So
when it comes to getting new people.
yeah, exactly. We have a join process now where you have to fill out a lot of questions, and that deters a fair share of people. But I'm also fairly vigilant about, and we're talking specifically for Slack. So specifically for the conversations that are happening in Slack and what's going on in there, I make sure that if there's self promotion in the wrong channel, that gets picked up really quickly. And if there are too many like very beginner questions, I try to that's always been one that I've had a really hard time playing with, because you don't want to say like, hey beginner, get out of here.
No, no, no.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's not cool and not really inclusive, but it also does destroy these high quality conversations that you're having if 5 out of every 6 are really simple beginner. What's better? Should I learn Python or Rust or SQL? And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
dude, just don't even worry about any of that. Choose one, figure it out, and you'll find a path forward. And so luckily, I'm not sure really how, but we've managed to keep the conversation high even when the numbers have gotten bigger and bigger. I do almost romanticize, though, like right before we hit 1,000 people and then up until 2,000 people in Slack, it felt like everyone in Slack that was talking knew each other and knew each other's quirks and knew each other's like personalities, albeit their internet personalities and their Slack personalities. And so that was fun to have.
Yeah.
But
That,
now we get so many people that are coming at the problems and the questions from so many different angles. And
mm-hmm.
that creates a really ripe discussion.
I wonder if it's something that is special to something like MLOps or DevOps, where you're not gonna have that many junior folks by design. You're gonna have more junior folks in ML or data science, right? Than like, because the path to MLOps isn't like, hey, I just finished, high school. I want to, I don't know, or
Data
university. I want to
science boot
become an
camp.
MLOps,
Yeah.
or I want to run a platform team at Twitter or something. Like, like cool, man. But it's gonna take you a little bit to get there, right? So
Yeah.
I wonder if it's maybe also the role, or the role of MLOps in the organization. Like, true, obviously everyone could learn the principles and it's valuable for everyone, right? Who's doing production ML, but maybe by design it just extracts. And also I didn't see many channels who were like, maybe over time it changed, but definitely at the beginning there weren't those data science channel or something like that. Like, there are other places for that. Like, go on Reddit and how to learn data science. There are
Yeah.
whole subreddits about it. Yeah, maybe
Totally.
that's that. But you mentioned something, and I kind of want to go to those those early days, because I think, yeah, like obviously having that big community, that's great, and I want to talk about stages of getting there
Mm.
later. But for many folks, I think it's going to be more interesting to figure out the beginnings, those first things that you do, etc. So let's go all the way back, and I kind of want to, because I don't know the story. I kind of want to know, how did it start it, like how did that Slack started?
We were, so I was working at this company called Dot Science, and they were doing data lineage. It was a tool for data lineage, and it also had a little bit of monitoring and a little bit of deployment options.
Mm-hmm.
And this was 2019. It was very early for people to be wanting data lineage. You can
Yeah.
imagine people now in 2024 are still like iffy about data lineage. Imagine in 2019.
Oh,
And
I can definitely imagine. Like, I'm in experiment tracking, right? So I know, like, I remember it was funny when at the beginning it was like this discussion, like, why, yeah, but like, why do anything like that when you can just like write it down in a spreadsheet, or
yeah,
I can just copy, like I have it in my notebook. So what
exactly.
do you mean I can? And it's like we dug out those discussions from, I think it was like 10 or 15 years before that, on Stack Overflow, talking about code versioning that were the same. It was like, well, yeah, I mean, but I can just like send an email with that, with that zip
Yeah,
file, zip file of that
exactly.
folder with all the code. Like, what do you mean I cannot version it? Why would you need something like that? So I think it's like, yeah, and definitely for data lineage, 100%.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so it was doing that. I was on the sales team, and the company ended up having problems when COVID hit to get people on the phone
Mm-hmm.
to sell stuff to. And so our boss, our CEO, was from the Kubernetes, like Docker space, and he had community in his blood pretty much. And he said, why don't we do some type of a community around MLOps? Because we had just been at AWS reInvent, and on our booth at reInvent, we just threw a sign up that said MLOps, and there was a lot of interest from people. So we recognized that that message was fascinating at that time for the right subset of DevOps slash machine learning. And we were calling it, I remember we were calling it DevOps for machine learning for a long time, and then just ran with the MLOps idea and
Mm-hmm.
terminology. And from there, we had the first virtual meetup because COVID made everything go online. And then about
But wait,
four
was it
weeks
like
after that,
did you do like a first virtual meetup after? So timeline, you first you go to that conference, you figure out MLOps is interesting, then what do you did a virtual meetup, or did you set up the Slack, and
so
got
the
some people
Slack
in there?
was already, we pirated the Slack. The Slack was already from an old open source project called Dot Mesh that Dot Science, the company
Oh.
that we were working on, was using. Basically, dot science was built on top of dot mesh. Dot mesh was this open source project, and we said, all right, well, we've already got this Slack, let's just change the name. But that all happened after COVID hit, and we weren't planning on doing community or any type of virtual stuff. It just so happens, since COVID made everything virtual, then we said, all right, cool, let's do a virtual meetup, and we're going to start doing these regularly. And I remember the whole team was very excited about the idea. And after the original meeting, nobody else did anything.
How do you?
With, yeah, I kind of like was past the hot potato and said, go and run with it. And so I started booking out people for the virtual meetups, and it quickly turned into people could give presentations, but our second guest said, yeah, but why don't we just do it as more of a fireside conversation, fireside chat? And I said, okay, great. And I had to go ask everyone I knew for questions to ask this person, because I had no idea what to talk about. And I was not versed in the lexicon or the vocabulary that I am now. And
Yeah,
I
because like
thought it was,
like that was always fascinating to me, how you managed to build all that with, you know, so many great conversations, etc. And but you don't come from production ML, like you haven't
not at
built
all
production ML, right? You're yourself, but you are a fantastic connector,
a
and over
fantastic
time,
talk.
like you got pretty well versed, I'd say. You know, like now you're like,
Yeah.
you know your
Now I
stuff.
know enough buzzwords to be dangerous, is what I like to say. So
Yeah. But
the,
even more power to you, right? I think it's like, you know, if you're a practitioner, that's easier. But like, you know, like I think this is fantastic. That this shows that, you know, like perhaps there are certain things where, I mean, maybe that actually makes it practitioners or members of that community first by design, because
yeah,
you're not gonna be
exactly.
the person that is like, you know, giving talks on how to do things, right? Like that's not your
Exactly.
place, right? And and maybe that's how you build it, like whether you are a practitioner or not, like having that sort of mindset.
Well, and that was a lot of the reason why I would talk with people, find out what they were working on and what they were doing, what they were passionate about, and then tag them into threads, because I couldn't answer the questions
Mm.
that were happening. But there would be words that I would be able to relate and say, oh, I think I was just talking to John about that. Or Flavio mentioned something to me. Is this what you're working on, Flavio? And even if it wasn't what that person was working on, they would still jump in the thread and say, no, but I think I know what you're talking about, and I've done it like this. And so even
Hmm.
if I was way off base, it would still foster that communication. And so, yeah, then about a month into the community being with dot science went out of business. And I had to make a choice. Like, do I keep doing this community even though now I'm not getting paid to do it? Or do I let it fizzle out and try and do something new?
Hmm.
And I ultimately said, I'm going to keep doing the community, because it feels like there's a lot of energy here. And the moment that there was a few early signals, one of the early signals was that I stopped reaching out to people. So the way that we were growing it when I was at Dot Science is I was reaching out to people every day on LinkedIn and telling them, hey, I've spent the last 40 days locked in my house, and I wanted to do something productive with my life. So I started this community. If you want to
Mm.
join, let me know. And so I took all my sales skills and I just aimed them at inviting people into the community versus trying to get them onto a phone call and sell them on something.
Mm. Question. So those folks you picked out, right? Like how targeted were you? Sort of, was it that you knew that you have to seed the community with like, you know, very, you know, yeah, senior folks or folks who are like
No,
really in this? How
I
did you think about that?
Well, in those days, you got to remember, not a lot of people had MLOps
Yeah,
anywhere in
probably
their
nobody had
LinkedIn.
MLOps, like,
Yeah.
at the very beginning.
There
Let's
was
be
a
honest.
select few of us
Yeah.
that were interested in MLOps, and they had it in their LinkedIn profiles or Twitter bios or whatever. And so that was the core group that I asked. But then I also just started asking people who had ML engineer in their title, or
Mm-hmm,
were
mm-hmm,
some kind of
mm-hmm.
engineer, ML engineer. And that was what I just canvassed the whole US, I think is what I would go. I would choose a city every day and say, all right, now I'm going to do Chicago, or all right, now, and I would do the LinkedIn search, just type in the keyword machine learning engineer, and reach out to as many people as I could before LinkedIn said, like, you've reached out to enough people today. And in those days, you could reach out to 100
50
people per
was it?
day,
100.
a
Okay.
100 a day. And now it's like 100 a week.
Mm.
So
Unless
I
you
was reaching
pay.
out to a lot of people. Yeah. And then you gotta expect that. So only maybe 3% of these people connected with me. And then from that 3% that connected, 3% or 1% actually came into the community. But if you're connecting with 700 people every week, then
Yeah,
that
it adds
turns
up. It adds
into,
up.
but
It's one of the things that people forget. You know, when you're like growing your profile, one of the things you can do is just invite people.
yeah,
It
yeah,
just
yeah,
it just freaking
exactly.
invite people, like you can figure out who you want to be your followers and invite them, and it
Yeah,
it grows,
100%.
like if you think about it, it's like, yeah, let's say it's 100 a week, so that's what, 5,000 a year. You're
Yeah.
just inviting, no loops, no
Yeah.
viral loops of them sharing and other people, just invite them. I mean, it's hard work, or you gotta automate it,
Yeah.
but anyway, I
But
think that's
one thing, just to close the loop on
yeah,
the
yeah.
early signals, one of the early signals was that I stopped reaching out to people, yet I was still seeing people join the MLOps community Slack. And so I had, in the beginning, I had the notification on whenever somebody new would join the Slack. And so every time somebody new would join, I would get a notification, and I stopped reaching out to people, and I was still getting these notifications. And that was after Dot Science had gone out of business, and I had been sending resumes to everybody I know, trying to get a new job. But there was that early signal that made me think maybe there's something here, because I'm no longer inviting people. It feels like it's spreading by word of mouth.
Hmm. Yeah, that's always a good signal. Always a good one. Especially if like you can see that those people come in and they engage with your
Yeah.
product or engage with the community, whatever that is. And actually that gets me to the second question. For those early days, right? You mentioned that there were fireside chats that, you invite those people. Okay, so they sign up, and what? Like typically what happens, at least from my experience, is like somebody has to see the conversations, has to start the discussions, etc., right? So it's not just, hey, I'm Matt, I work at I do MLOps at this and that, like I'm happy to connect with, happy to chat, and then you
Mm-hmm.
get those intros, but that's not enough, obviously, to to make somebody want to come back. So what did you do to get those
So
conversations going that are, yeah.
in the early days, I was just manually reaching out to people as they would come in, because I would get the notification, so and so joined, Kuba joined, and then I would hit them up and say, "Hey, this is awesome! You made it in here. I'm Demetrios, and feel free to let me know if you have any questions or you want to have a chat sometime." And some people took me up on it, and we would just have like a virtual coffee. And especially in 2020, and everybody's inside,
Yeah.
and now you found people that like MLOps, it felt like, oh wow, this is pretty cool. All right, let's see what's up. And so
I
people
think I
were
think we had that chat, and I
maybe,
think what he also did there, as far as I remember, at least, like that's how I remember. Obviously, memories are a funny thing, but um, you ask some stuff around like what are we doing, what are we thinking about, right? Like what I'm looking for, etc.
mm,
And basically from that, like, and what it was clear where could I be tagged in those conversations? Who should I be connected to if you see someone, who could be valuable for me or valuable for them? And so, yeah, so it did feel like that, if you dissect it. And it was fun. Like, always talking to you is fun. But that was like, you could see that there's like, those would probably be the goals of that, initial chat. Like,
100%. Yeah, it
yeah.
was, how can I get to know you so that I can incorporate you into the community and try and get you engaged? And exactly that. Are there conversations that I've had in the last week that I think you would be uniquely positioned to give an opinion on? And or are there people that I've talked with in the last week or 2 weeks? It's usually just like a week or 2 weeks. I have recency bias, oh, I was just talking to that person, you should meet them, or you should have a chat. Do you know them already? Yeah. Or have you seen this blog? That's a really great blog that I like to follow, or and et cetera, et cetera. And also, so in the beginning I was doing it manually. I figured out how to do it automated. And I also set up in Slack, you can set up a welcome message. And so I set up this welcome message that basically asked a few things when people would join. It'd say, hey, thanks for joining. Please read the code of conduct, because I quickly had to figure out, okay, we need a code of conduct. Just so that it put somewhere, please don't spam. And if you do, I'm probably going to ban you.
I remember you put us in the vendor channel, and there was a vendor channel,
There was
which
a
I think
lot.
is, that's
Yeah,
important,
it was
managing
hard
that.
at the beginning. I think it's much less now. And maybe that's because vendors don't see this as a place to troll for leads, or there's other places that they can look. I don't know why it's changed, but especially in those early days, it almost felt like we had 50-50 vendors to practitioners, and the vendors were constantly jumping in on threads saying, oh, you know what can solve your problem that you're asking in this thread is my tool. And so I had to just be pretty strict about that. And that was frustrating. That was really hard in the beginning, but has since cooled off. And it might be because of the automated messages and onboarding sequence that I set up since then. That helped cut down on a lot of spam and a lot of that. Like the code of conduct helped. And the automated sequence though was great, because I could learn about what you were interested in learning about through a choose your own adventure type decision tree. And
So
then
what sort of
if
questions that did you ask there? Is it like, like
I would ask,
areas?
so the first thing, and now we've replicated that, but it's before you get into Slack. So it's no longer in Slack. It's to get into the community itself, because it was always optional once you were already in Slack. And now we made it once you're trying to get into the community, and we have less questions, so it's a little different. But when it was in Slack, what we wanted to do was give people as much orientation as possible, so it wasn't just like dropped into a Slack and you got to go find what channels you vibe with, and you got to see if like anybody in this Slack. And
Yeah.
especially with so many people, that doesn't really work out well. So the questions that we'd be asking, I remember the first one would always be, what do you consider yourself, or how do you identify as? Not gender related. How do you identify as, like, just starting, practitioner, or vendor type thing? And depending on what you chose, we had different routes for you to take. So if you're just starting, it would ask you a little bit more basic questions, like, are you using any tooling yet? What are you most interested in learning about? Where have you been learning all that? And it would give information on, oh, well, you want to learn stuff on AWS? Here's some great courses about SageMaker. And here's a really cool blog post about XYZ. So it would give resources too. that were helpful, or here's a podcast we did with the
Yeah.
AWS team. And
Yeah.
then if it was a practitioner, it would ask, what's your tech stack? What are you most, or what are your goals for the year?
Biggest
And
problem.
what's your biggest problem you're trying to solve? And then what I realize now, we were kind of getting at, but we weren't fully getting at. And so now with our onboarding, we really are trying to solve that. Is everyone comes to the community for a different reason. And again, everyone comes to the MLOps community for a different reason. I think if it's open source communities, it's probably a little bit different. But for the MLOps community, people come for different reasons. And so some of the user journeys that we've mapped out are, maybe I'm a VC and I'm trying to see what's going on in the AI ML space. Maybe I am a founder and I am either looking for a co-founder, I'm looking for my first engineers, I'm looking to get the word out about my open source project, I am just looking to interact with people or do almost like market research / learn
Mm-hmm.
about what people's pains are. Maybe I'm a marketer and I want to get the word out about the product that is in this space. Maybe I'm an engineer, but I'm looking for a job, or I'm an
Yeah.
engineer and I'm looking to hire someone, or I'm an engineer and I'm looking to learn stuff, or I'm
Yeah.
an engineer and I
But
have
is
a
it so
burning question.
is it those journeys? I'm wondering, is it something that comes later, as in at the beginning, basically? I mean, my assumption would be you need the practitioners who want to talk craft. I don't know, like get better at their craft. Like probably that's the seed. I mean, maybe completely wrong, right? I really want to see how you think about it. But at the beginning, that first, I don't know, 100 active people, you got to get to 100 active practitioners. If you don't do that, then VCs don't matter, people joining don't matter, founders don't matter. Like nothing matters until you get to 100
Right.
active practitioners. I don't know. Like I'm wondering if how you see that.
100%. And that's what, sorry, I should have prefaced this. This is how we are doing it now,
Mm-hmm.
because we've been able to notify, or we've been able to notice that there are these different paths or these different
Mm-hmm.
reasons that people come into the community.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to identify these different reasons that people are joining the community so we can help them on their journey. So if you're coming into the community because you're looking for a job, well, it's sweet if we can match you with a few people that are hiring, because we've identified that these people are looking to hire their next engineers. And so we almost have that two-sided marketplace. But if you've got a burning question, how can we help you by shepherding you into the right place to ask that question, or make sure that you have everything you need? Maybe you don't even need to ask that question. You just can
Mm-hmm.
be served up a few different resources where that question is answered. And that's a little bit idealistic, but uh, that's what we're working towards. And
Helps, but
but in the beginning, for sure, you need high quality conversations happening between practitioners, and that will attract everyone else.
so on
VCs
that
don't.
on that on that subject, because you mentioned that first you did that virtual meetup and sort of fireside conversations. You started reaching out to people and reached out for a bit until you had critical mass of people actually getting into the community, right? You had conversations with folks when they joined, or tried to have those conversations to be able to start, to sort of not start maybe, but like, make them alive, the conversations when they happen. Somebody asks a question so you can tag people, etc., etc. But something that you didn't answer that I'm wondering about is, how did you get the conversation started? Or was it people started asking questions right away and they were asking, you just needed to sort of kindle that conversation? Or you seeded them as well with like, this is a blog post I read, I don't get it, or like that, this question comes up in 5 of my last 10 conversations. People talk about, I don't know, data versioning or whatever that may be, right? And I'm wondering, like, what do you think? So
So
how did you
I
seed them?
wish I understood the technicality of the space enough to be able to gather insights from these conversations that I was having with people or reading blogs and saying like, I don't understand this. I basically was sharing content in the community, and I thought that was content that I felt like was quality, high quality, and basically the bar wasn't that high because it was like if I didn't understand it, then I was like, oh, this is pretty good. If I did understand
Funny
it,
you should say that. Funny you should say that because like this is exactly. I remember listening to a podcast with folks from Figma at the beginning when they didn't have a product, but they built a huge community of designers on Hacker News. You know, the person that was running, they had a designer relationship, so the dev role for designer, they had that role. Funny enough, that person didn't connect it to the dev role, concept. I don't know if she knew about it, but anyway, what she said that was that like she was running marketing, right? Like VP marketing.
yeah,
She said that like yeah, like if I could write it, it's crap.
yeah,
If I could write it, it's crap. So like it's the same thing you mentioned. It's like if I understand it, there's no way this is good.
yeah,
For
exactly.
practitioners.
It was too high level. If I understood it, it was like, oh, this was written by a marketer. But if there were code snippets and there was design principles and there was system design diagrams with a lot of logos that I had no idea what they were, like the AWS logos or the different database, Databricks, whatever logos that I had no idea what these were. And I would share it and be like, oh, this is pretty good. What are your thoughts? But that didn't really seed conversations. That would just show people that it's not a ghost town when they would join. What would seed conversations is when I was on calls with people like you or any of the other 20 people that I would talk to per week, I would say, hey, you know what would be awesome is if you can ask a question in the MLOps questions answered channel or in the general channel, because I'm
Mm.
really trying to get this moving. I'm trying to make this Slack feel more alive. And I feel like you have a lot to say. And so people would just ask questions, and you
Hmm.
would get one person that asked one question after a call, and then you would break the seal. And so sometimes that one person would then chime in on other questions that were coming through, or that one person would ask another question a week later. And because of the other people that were in the community and the fact that I would make sure that no thread went unanswered or no question went unanswered, I think that helped foster that early banter.
Any tip on how to get, so you see that person, asking a question, then maybe they answer one question or two, right? And did you do anything in particular to sort of again like elevate them in the community, or sort of like make it, yeah, like basically reinforce that this is the behavior you want to see, right? What was the carrot, that you that you saw? I mean, proverbial carrot uh, for that,
I guess I was sharing cool articles and I would just get those people. Again, it's like, how can I get the people that I respect or I feel like are good? How can I give them a platform? So I would ask
Yeah.
them if they want to come on to the virtual meetup, or
Mm-hmm.
if they want to. And once we started building out different pieces of the content machine, then it would be featuring them in the newsletter or featuring a really cool discussion that they said or an idea that they told me, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm.
But yeah, also the some other early signals I think that were really strong signals, positive signals, were when people started raising their hands to be volunteers and
Mm.
say, "Oh yeah, how can I help out? I want to do you need any help, because I'm looking to do more stuff and I would love to help out. This community is awesome." So that was a strong positive signal. But just let me also preface this that this is all for the Slack
Yeah.
workspace. Going in person and having in person meetups is a whole different beast.
But that's
And
sort of like next later stages. So I want to get
yeah,
to them in a minute, but I'm still kind of, I think like, later stages, they don't happen if the early stages don't happen and don't succeed,
yeah,
right? So I'm thinking that that very first sort of stage you mentioned. So there are already a couple of things that you mentioned that I think are very valuable to move the needle, right? You mentioned that fireside chat a few times. Would you say that that was essential to giving people the sort of like synchronous way of connecting, and that was one of the things that were essential? Or if you were to do it again, you wouldn't do that, you would maybe do something else?
well, I think the funny thing is that people never really join the community to consume the content that the community creates, because fireside chats are, it's almost like a one to many relationship as opposed to the many to many relationship that the forums have or meeting in person has. And so I never saw it. I just saw it as something fun and an excuse for me to learn and to talk with people and also get to, like, I don't know if the founder of Databricks would take a meeting with me if it wasn't recorded, you know? So I selfishly have a podcast so that there is a reason why he is open to talking with me. And so it was more of that. And if you look at the numbers, the growth of the community in general, whether it is the in-person meetups or the email list or the Slack channel, those numbers have always been, and I think will always be, much higher than the people that listen to the podcast or the fireside conversations.
By the way, I'm kind of thinking like, how do you think about those stages? Because we talk early stages, blah blah blah. Is it like sort of maybe, I don't know, 0 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000, 10,000 up, like, the sort of levels, or how would you think about it? And sort of maybe there are different things that
I
set it in stages.
I feel like it was, so if we're specifically talking about Slack, for me, everything from like 0 to 1,000, 0 to 2,000 kind of felt the same.
Hmm.
And then after 2,000, it wasn't like from one day to the next you noticed a shift, but it started being a lot of people. And of course, there's 2,000 people that say they're in there, but there's not 2,000 people or 22,000 people that are checking the workspace every day. And so I think at 2,000, it just started to feel like, wow, there's more people in here than we planned for. And so you start to notice that it's getting crowded or it's getting noisy. And so I like to do feedback surveys and ask the community members about what they like about the community, what they don't like. And that's how I knew a lot of people didn't actually know that we had a podcast or any of that, because some of the questions that I asked were, what feedback do you have about the podcast? How can we make it better? And people would say, oh, there's a podcast? I didn't even know that. I'm going to go look it up. So half of me was doing that as a little bit of a growth marketing tactic of, oh, I'm subliminally letting you know that we have a podcast, so go check it out, without specifically overtly saying you should listen to my podcast. But then the other half was because I really wanted to know what people thought and how I could make it better and what guests we should have and all of that. And so in the feedback survey, one of the things that we got that was blatantly clear, and feedback surveys are notoriously hard just in general. So if you
Yeah,
ever do them,
I do them, and I
oh,
love, like, I'm a strong proponent of doing a lot of those things in, like, but especially early, and as open as possible, so that you learn
that's
things
what I
you
did.
didn't know about, because like then it's easy to
Exactly.
like think and you don't know shit.
No, I did
and,
all free text fields, and
mm,
I've done them a few times. One with just how people are using LLMs in production, another with this in the early days of the community. I think it was when we were at like 2,500 people. I did it twice or three times. I did it once a year, basically in 2021 and 2022. I did it, and then it just got to be too big. But yeah, I think like 300, 400 people filled it out, and it was all free text boxes. And so you're trying to tease out what the pieces are that you can improve upon. And
Yeah.
it's so weird because some people would say, I love this. And then the next person would say, I hate this. And it's there. One person loves it, one person hates it. And so at the end of the day, I have to make the decision. Do I like it? And do I want to continue to invest time in making this a thing, or can we cut it? And so
Did you
one
have
thing
a
that
role in there? Because like I think oftentimes when you have this like um completely opposite answers to a particular question, right? Like something like, do you like this? Do you hate this? Right? It comes down to a person with either a completely different role or a completely different goal for being in there, in a newsletter, in a, signing up for a product or whatever it is. But like, I wonder if it's like, yeah, like
I did not ask the role. I don't think, I can't remember, maybe the
mm,
company.
mm,
But yeah, that's a great point. It potentially was that, like what the goals were. And I wasn't catering enough to the goals or the needs of that individual. And
yeah.
so,
I
but
remember
I,
one example there from one of those surveys where I remember, you mentioned something of like, some folks like hate that vendors are here. Some folks want vendors to be more there. I was like, okay, I wonder how many vendors said that they wish there was more vendor talk.
no, but surprisingly, some people, I would say, like, how do you engage with the community, or what are your favorite parts about the community? Some people would say the Be Shameless channel. And that's basically all just what
Hmm.
other people consider to be spam. But
Mm.
some, and these are practitioners, these aren't vendors that are saying, I love the Be Shameless channel. And so I would
Yeah.
dig into that and say, like, why do you like the Be Shameless channel? That's weird to me. I thought that was just a catch all so that people could have an outlet. It's like a little pressure valve so that all of the spam can have somewhere to go, but nobody actually checks it, do they? And these practitioners would say, no, I love that because it keeps me up to date on what's going on in the industry. And a lot of times, some of the most advanced stuff is coming out of the vendors because they're just thinking about it 24/7. You're thinking about experiment tracking or whatever it may be 24/7. The average practitioner isn't day in, day out thinking about that unless they're in a highly specialized role at a gigantic company, right? So, for that person, when they get to see the blog post that you wrote, or they get to see that you're having a webinar all about this thing, it's a great way for them to keep up to date.
It's
And
a good
that was
point.
a
It's a good
revelation.
point. That's an
That
interesting
was,
one. Hmm.
like, it was like, oh, I never would have thought that. And I did not realize people actually liked it, but it makes sense. So, but the other thing that people said, in especially in those early days, one piece of feedback that was a little bit of a hard pill for me to swallow in the beginning was that somebody said, this isn't really a community yet. This is just a place where Demetrius leaves his links. And it's
Mm.
like his, almost like Demetrius's curated space. And that was the first feedback survey. And we must have only been, it must have been like less than 1,000 people, because after that, that was when I really started going hard on, okay, I'm not going to just try and be the center of attention anymore. I'm not like, if I can step away from the limelight, that's better. And if I can put the spotlight on someone else, that's going to be more effective.
Mm.
And so that was the goal from that point on. And then the other piece was, hey, there is a lot of conversations happening in Slack, and there's a lot of channels. And so people feel overwhelmed. They come into Slack, they see that they have 50 unread messages from 10 different channels, and that can make somebody not want to come back to the Slack.
100%.
So,
I actually quite that's one of the sort of like a nitty gritty I wanted to ask you, is we had that discussion in our community. We ended up going for extremely limited number of channels. So we basically have ask anything, share anything, jobs, intros, and that's it, I think, and water cooler or something
yeah,
like that. Like have announcements as well if something happens, so like it's
yeah.
for admins. But basically most of the things happen in ask anything or share anything. Right. And but it was different in like it was different in MLOps community. And I wonder how you thought about like this sort of like channel distribution, like making it
Mm.
more focused versus having less channels so that people know where to go. How did you think about that? How do you think about it now? Maybe how it changed over time?
So in the beginning, there was a ton of channels that people would get thrown into as soon as they joined. Now I just put them into 2 channels, and I take the inspiration from Rand's Slack, where it's kind of like you figure out which channels you want to join, and each channel is its own little subgroup, almost like a subreddit. And
Mm,
so if that channel is active and that channel has someone that is championing for it to happen, then that's cool. But if not, whatever, then it goes dormant. And I'm not going to subject everyone to join that channel right from the get go. But I am going to notify you if in the onboarding process and the questions that we asked you, you said, "Oh yeah, I'm
mm.
doing a lot of stuff with LLMs." Well, then I'm gonna suggest that you join the LLM Ops channel.
Yeah, 100%. So basically there's absolute core, like probably something like, I don't know, general and discussions or something like that.
Yeah, general
And,
and intro is
general intro. Uh-huh.
yeah, and be shameless just so that we
Mm,
avoid the spam, because there are a lot of
mm.
people. What I noticed is if you don't have be shameless on there, people will come in, they'll just look for the first place to drop their links, and then they'll get out. And so then all of a sudden the intro channel is getting a bunch of random spam, and you're like, why is this happening? So I learned the hard way from that one.
Hmm. That's a nice trick. That's a nice trick. I like that. Like over time, we notice in our community, and I think in many communities that happens, is basically those local groups form.
Uh-huh.
You have, London group or San Francisco group, and that sort of, I think that's how it happened in MLOps community, that it merged or, transformed into those live meetups where local channels happen, and then those local channels transformed into local meetups. And
Yeah.
then I don't know, like what are some others, or do you have comments on that?
Yeah, for sure. And we also had volunteers that were doing best of Slack. So Steven, he started doing the best of Slack where he would grab some of his favorite threads. And that was specifically created for the person who feels overwhelmed by
Mm-hmm.
going into Slack and seeing 50 unread messages in 20 different channels. We said, look, we'll curate some of our favorite discussions, some things where we feel like there's some novelty being shared, and it will save you the 20 minutes of surfing through lots of different questions. You can just get right to what we consider the top questions or the top discussions of the day and or of the week. And so because of that feedback that we had in the feedback form, we started that best of Slack email.
Mm-hmm. No, but that I think is like, yeah, you're gonna have a lot of those problems that happen at scale. That's why I asked about those stages before, right? And you mentioned 2, and I wonder, does that mean that the stage from like 0 to, let's say, 2000, you say this is stage 1, then 2000 plus was stage 2? Does it mean that 2000 feels the same as 20,000, sort of, or
No,
there was a
yeah.
difference?
So for
Yeah.
us, it's very much that, like 2000 to, I don't know when it changed, but it definitely changed. I would say we're in stage 3 or maybe even stage 4 right now, but I for sure notice that you need more infrastructure once you get to a certain point if you want to keep the community alive in a
Mm.
way. and
Infrastructure, as in.
vibrant. Yeah, just people that are working,
Hmm.
and also we're surviving off of sponsorship. So that needs to be very well thought out, because sponsors, unless they're like you, sponsors are always trying to get more and basically like get squeeze the community for everything that it's worth. And if I'm not careful, I can sell my soul to the devil. And next thing you know, sponsors have everyone's emails and they're spamming people. And it's obvious that it came from the community, because a lot of people will sign up to the community like John plus MLOps community email at whatever domain. And so when they look back and they say, how did this sponsor get my email? And it's obvious there. So I have to make sure that if we're going to interface with sponsors, it has to be in a clean way, and they have to understand. It's a lot of education to the marketing side, just so that the marketers understand this isn't really a place where you come to farm for leads. This is a place where you can share your narratives, share your experiences, get that thought leadership going. But if
I mean,
you're
in the end, I think you do farm for leads, but not in a obvious "give me leads today" way, right?
yeah,
That's that. Like it's
exactly
in that less obvious, as you
wrong
said,
way.
like like your perspective. There's a angle to the solution to the problem that you want to solve, or like, yeah, or just getting your brand associated with highly technical expertise in a particular thing that
Yeah.
over time translates to more trust and more conversions, more leads and stuff like that. So I think it's like, yeah, but then you have, yeah, can we get the lead list right now? And then, and it could be that the lead list is not going to be used, to do anything bad. Like it could still be that you have that long term in mind, but
Mm-hmm.
I find it often doesn't.
No, especially if marketing is being pressured to give leads to sales, or hit a certain number of MQLs, then
Yeah.
it's, and how vendors slash tooling companies interact with third party communities as a whole, very interesting discussion. But going back to the question that you
Stages, right? Mm-hmm.
phrased, which is like, what was the different phases? I don't know if I would consider it that in Slack all of a sudden things felt different. Like, I don't necessarily look at it as, okay, at this number of people in Slack it was a different phase. It was more the phases of the community just becoming, now COVID's ending, we started going and doing in-person stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
uh, half of that was help from you guys saying we want to sponsor in-person stuff. I didn't have in-person. I
Yeah, I
think
remember
I
that.
yeah, we talked about it. It was like, all right, well, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that are in the community that would be interested in in-person stuff, but we didn't really have these local champions like we do today. But since you sponsored us, then I was able to hire someone that fully looked after in-person events and was able to activate all of these local communities. And we set it up so the local communities could get reimbursed if they had expenses, and Neptune was the sponsor for these different local communities. And so that was really a game changer. That was a different phase, right? That went from
Mm-hmm.
basically
Mm-hmm.
online to offline.
Mm-hmm.
And now we started doing it in person. We started having people that, again, could interact and interface with the community in different ways. And so maybe this person isn't sharing an incredibly technical blog, but they're in the community. They want to interface with the community. And so they start a local chapter, and we set up all the documentation and everything you need for that. And that got us into 37 cities fairly
Wow.
quickly. So everywhere from South Korea to Amsterdam to New York to Toronto, Mexico
Yeah.
City,
I
all of
saw I
it.
saw one in Warsaw. Like we went to that as well. The one in Warsaw, we
Yeah,
had a talk there, and it's everywhere.
exactly.
I think that's
everywhere.
great. Like,
It's super cool to see the interest and how people vibe with it. And so now the fun part is like, all right, like the really hard part is that if you set a precedence for, all right, we're going to reimburse you, and then you have 37 cities asking for $800 every month,
yeah.
that can make the finances get really difficult really fast. And so been trying to figure that out and figure out how to make that work. But that was what I would consider phase two, going in person. And then there was the boom of the AI, LLM, chat GPT, and generative AI. And so that's what I would consider phase three, because now it's opening up to the whole AI sphere. And I don't think we have a lot of software engineers turned AI engineers in the community. We still have a lot of data scientists, data engineers, ML engineers, SREs.
Yeah.
But all these folks still are, and and it's so interesting to see, like the platform folks, like an ML platform engineer now has to support
Yeah.
LLMs. And so those are really fascinating questions. And we started making more content around that. And that's where the virtual conferences came into play, and also the surveys came into play. And yeah, that's what I would consider the phase
So
three.
so the phases then would be sort of, the first one is, yeah, let's, getting it going, starting, having something that is actually vibrant, that actually has those conversations. Maybe that is at 1,000 people, 2,000 people, somewhere there. And people are coming in. Word of mouth happens. You're helping helping make those conversations deeper, connect more people, add them to the conversations,
Mhm.
get it going. Then it started becoming bigger, sort of when you started to feel the need to add some infrastructure, some folks to help, because it's hard to do all of that yourself.
Mhm.
Then vendor, sort of relationship starts happening. So, if you bring people in and it's not just volunteers, but you actually want to hire folks, then somebody needs to pay for this. And and obviously, yeah, if the community is vibrant, then vendors want to promote. So it's a
Mhm.
good, if done well, could work. So that worked, right? So you start building that, and then that transition, or the loop between live and offline, online and offline, happens with meetups. And then you know then the next phase is just a big market change with AI,
Mhm.
and completely new group that is, I don't know, 10x bigger,
Yeah.
of folks comes in. Okay, cool.
And also, I should probably say this too, that going back to one of those first questions you asked on why there's so many communities of support,
Mm-hmm.
if you really want to do this, or if you want to really try and replicate what we did in the MLOps community, it is a Herculean effort. And I lived and breathed this for so many minutes slash days slash months slash years, right? And when I think back on this, and a lot of times that's why people come and they ask, like, hey, we're starting a community, can you help us out? And if it's like, I'm going to go through this whole thing again, no, like I've played that game, I beat that level, I'm on to the next level. I don't want to go and seed a community again, because I've also done it for a few other communities. Like I've done two other communities that I would say. One is the Data on Kubernetes community, and then another is the Are You a Robot community for like data ethics type stuff, AI ethics.
Mm.
And both of those, I kind of ran the same playbook, but you need to live and breathe this. And just you think about how much of your time is sucked up by being in the Slack, keeping
Yeah,
a
doing those conversations, getting that insights, connecting people together,
exactly.
making sure that the right, like the conversation, the direction goes in the way that actually makes more people interested, etc. Like,
Yeah.
But
And then all the
that's
content
defensible, right?
that you're
Isn't it?
building around it. All that content too, that you're like attracting new people in, but also keeping the people that are there engaged. And so if I were to start a community, and when I usually advise others who ask me about community and they say, I want to start a community, and it's like, well, do you really know what it takes? And why do you want this community? What is the goal
Yeah.
of it? Just because communities are really attractive for VCs or what? And so the thing that I would advise if you were thinking about starting a community is I would start with very exclusive in-person events first. And by doing that, then you can create a strong connection right away.
Can you make it more concrete? Like, so you mean, sort of steakhouse dinner kind of,
You can do it that
thing, or what do
way.
you mean?
The problem with like a steakhouse dinner is that the conversation can go anywhere. You can do it that way. And I might try that, see how successful that is. I'm more thinking, yeah, let's get 20, 30, 40, 50 people in a room that have all been vetted, and let's have a meetup, but like a very high quality meetup where a few people present stuff that's not recorded, and we explicitly say this isn't going to be recorded, so you can say whatever you want.
Yeah.
And then it feels like, wow, this is cool. This is a different type of meetup.
Funny enough, it's the only, like, I last I don't, because I don't go to meetups that much. I think the only meetup that I went out of my own volition last, I want to say 5 years maybe, is exactly what he said.
There
The
you
only
go.
one.
Now I would have the CTA after that be, all right, join our Slack. So you can have that initial contact, be getting people in a room together so they already know each other, and they're much more likely to have conversations or continue conversations in Slack or Discord than trying to get someone to warm up to a cold Slack or cold Discord group that may be gigantic.
So
So
what else is in that playbook? So we start, let's say, it's whatever tech it is, or whatever focus it is. We find folks, in one of the bigger, probably bigger cities that are, heavy in tech, right? Be it London, San Francisco, Berlin, wherever that is. We do that meetup. We get those folks into Slack. Maybe we do another one in another city. We get those folks into Slack. What do we do? What do we do then?
yeah, so I think you have to make sure that the topic slash messaging slash theme resonates with people, and you're going to know that much more quickly if you're doing these in-person meetups, right? You're going to be able to see, are people resonating with this? And then you're doing high quality type events and trying to really get people with these high quality events. Then ideally you have a really good idea of who the people are that are coming, and you're vetting them. You're making sure that it's like people have to apply to join these meetups, so it's a little bit more exclusive. If you want to refer a friend, you get like one referral or something in that regard. And then yeah, if you have a Slack off the back of it and you do stuff with that, then maybe it's like you can only join the Slack if you have joined a meetup. And if you want to have some kind of a podcast or content like newsletter slash podcast, it's just trying to go with how can I make everything very exclusive so that I have the right to turn anyone away, so I can keep it as high quality as possible. And we're going for quality, not quantity, right? And that's almost like the way that we're marketing it. And then you're making everyone feel like they are in this really secret club. But I would still run the same. So it's still the same thing. Like in Slack, when people join Slack, you're still like calling people out
Yeah.
or tagging them in threads or asking them to share stuff in that initial seeded instance. But you're doing it with the expectation that this isn't going to be a community that is trying to be a numbers game. This is trying to be a really,
The quality game,
yeah.
right?
Doing in-person events, there's a few things that I want to point on. One is that you're building that network. Two is that in-person events and exclusive in-person events are a little bit less work than trying to 24/7 have a community pumping out content.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do less with getting almost like that 80/20 principle. And so if you're doing it not as a vendor, you can still have an incredible network and be at the center of
Mm-hmm.
things. And a lot of people just really like that, like having a highly technical audience or a good group of friends. It gives you, again, it gives you an excuse to reach out to people that you probably wouldn't be able to reach out to if it was just, hey, this is me, random person at random
Yeah.
company. But
No. It's optionality. It's like, increasing the surface of luck. Like speaking about that, we spoke before the show of like, you can build an amazing, product or have a fantastic team, but if you pick a good market and a good
yeah,
problem, that's so much easier, so much better, right? So then if you can be in the center of this and you hear, those 50 CTOs talking about this being the biggest pain, then one, like, here's your market research,
yeah.
done with the people who would probably, maybe even do some sort of like a design partner thing with your POC if you actually had something.
Or if you're just trying to advance your career and you're thinking, I would like to be a CTO at some point, and so I
Yeah.
have these CTOs. Or maybe it's not a community of CTOs; it's a community of individual contributors at
Yeah.
companies
Particular
that
skill
you,
or
yeah.
whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm.
So I find that to be a
Hmm.
really powerful way of doing it, and I even have thought deeply about maybe in the next iteration or a product that we can have in the MLOps community is this smaller curated mastermind group that meets and it's almost like you pay to be a part of it as
Yeah.
opposed to having it be
Pay for
something free.
access. Pay for access to this, right? Because like
Yeah.
I listened to a podcast. I think it was on Dave Gerhardt's show, and he talked to another person, building communities, and he talked about that there is a part of building engagement, getting more folks in there, etc. But for many communities, if you think about it, those communities of craft is like, I want to be able, like me as a marketer, for example, right? I want to be able to have a place where I can go and maybe, find a person I could hire for a particular thing. Or I have
Mhm.
never done this particular type of marketing and now it is needed. So I need to go and learn it and figure out like, do I know anyone who did that? I'm wondering which way should we go, this way or that way, and I want to ask people. So it's not something that happens every day. It doesn't, but I want to have access to that community, right?
Yep.
When I have the problem, when I have the need. So it's something where it's interesting because and it goes back to that measurement thing, that you touch on at the beginning of like, how do you measure it? Because is engagement the thing? Or, if you have a person that would pay membership, yearly membership, to be a member of MLOps community so that those 5 times they have a question, they can come in and ask them. And they
Yeah.
get answers from people that they would have not had access to. So they would pay for it. So there's obviously value for them, for an individual
Yeah.
per person to pay for this, but it's not measured in engagement. It's
No.
not at all measured in engagement. So I wonder on that front, and it's sort of a tangent about how do you think about that, about the metrics for this, and how you know what metrics have you used as you grew this, and how did that change over time?
I've looked at, so metrics are always very fuzzy. I do try and just keep an eye on how everything is performing. So what all the content and how how things are growing. How many people are coming into Slack? How many daily active users are there, or weekly active users? How many people are sharing things or like messages being sent? Then you have the quality of the conversations that are happening. And so this is one that is very subjective, but it goes back to, I don't want to have a community of beginners. I want to have a community of practitioners. And so then looking at all of the videos or the podcasts and the newsletter list, how many people open it, how many clicks are we getting, all of those like standard metrics that you would look at. But at the end of the day, I got this idea from this woman, Rosie, who's like an OG in the community space. She used to work for Orbit, and now I think she has her own community courses and stuff that I've never taken. So I don't know how good they are, but I really liked when she was on a podcast and I heard her talking about MRR, but not monthly recurring revenue. She called it monthly recurring relationships. And so you have different relationships with people. How can you make sure that you continue to have these relationships? Or maybe it's not me and that person, like me and you talking, it's you interfacing with the community in some way. So you are continuing on your relationship with the community. And so the specific metrics for that are, hey, is this person, and there was a tool we used to use called Campfire that was awesome, that specifically for Slack, it could tell you this person, it could give you a quadrant of, like, it would say this person has been active, or they've never shared anything, they've shared stuff, but it's been a while, and they've shared stuff, it's recent. And
so like retention, sort of cohort and analysis of the activity in there.
And you could even trigger different messages and workflows depending on what quadrant they were in. So if somebody was very active and then all of a sudden it's been 90 days since they were active, or they shared a message, or they were talking in Slack, you can trigger a direct message from me saying, oh, hey, by the way, I just thought you might like to know about this, or hey, I'm just checking in. How's everything going? Can I help with anything? That type of thing. So
Nice.
Those are things, but that's very Slack specific. For each local community, we look at like the local champions, how they're feeling, reaching out to them, making sure that they have everything they need, and making sure that they're all good and they're getting taken care of in that regard, and they're having events. So that's one that is just, it is a local champion organizing an event, because there's a lot of cities that maybe they'll organize one or two and then they won't organize anymore. And that's usually because they don't have the help, or they get a new job and they're doing something else. But
I like that you're talking about those signals. That's something I pick up. And I, so it's not metrics, it's signals. Cause I think that's the thing where those metrics, they should be proxies for an actual phenomenon that is happening underneath it. Right. And so, like actual phenomenon is having an active community of group of people that networks and, whatever phenomenon you want to have. Right.
Exactly.
And then you have metrics that should be a good proxy for it. Not the other way around, right? But it's
100%.
and then so you can have sometimes you can have like those metrics should give you signals, but the signals can also be qualitative. Like I think a lot of those things you can almost feel, like if you are in that community a lot, then you can almost feel it.
Yes.
That those like if you like you mentioned that you are there, right? So you are the metric taker.
Exactly.
Sort of
you feel the signals, you feel the vibe, you feel what's going on, and if it's active or not, and if what the quality is. But that's a great point. The signal, another signal is, we had an in-person conference. Can we get people in the room for that in-person conference? That's a huge signal. And how easy is it to get people into the room, and paying, that type of thing. So
that's a wrap for this episode of Going Deeper into Dev Marketing by developer Mark Appare. If you like the show and would like to support, follow the show and drop us a review. It means a ton and helps other dev tool founders and marketers find us. For more dev marketing resources, check out markepair.dev, where you'll find tens of guides and hundreds of examples. For more visual version of this pod, go to our YouTube channel at dev_markepair. See you next time.